in 2012, Parminder came to an understanding about the 126. We came to understand the 2520, or began to understand, I should say, the 2520 in 2005. And we've understood many things about this. As an example, when Josiah wants to do a work of reform, they discover the law of Moses, the curse of Moses, actually, in the temple. And the curse of Moses is the 2520. And we're saying that the discovery, the curse of Moses in the story of Josiah is 2005. Because what Josiah recognized at that point in time is that they were already under the curse of Leviticus 26. And he wanted to try to do whatever he could to turn that curse around. So from 2005, when we discovered the 2520, we're in the process of getting to the point where I said last night that we end up getting off into time setting without even knowing it, because we see this chiastic structure of the 2520 as set forth by Hiram Edson in his articles called The Times of the Gentiles, written in 1856. He doesn't extend the 19 years beyond 1844, but we do, and we see it. We can see it's a chiastic structure. Hiram Edson had not recognized that the 46 years was a symbol of the temple. We come to understand that. So as the 2520s opened up, not only do we, without recognizing it, begin the process of time setting, if you just want to put a starting point, we begin to get confronted with Palmoni, the wonderful number. We begin to see the Lord speaking not just through the grammar or the stories of the scriptures, but also through the numbers. And one of the starting points for that was the 2520 chiastic structure, where you see this 46 years between 723 and 677 that is repeated between 1798 and 1844. And we have a series that we sell. We've sold for years. I'm not trying to sell anything. It was in this history, when we're coming to grips with these truths, I had some material, and I had 2 weekend meetings where I wanted to just do all the material. So the first weekend was in Idaho, and the second weekend was in California, in a town called Blythe. So the Idaho-Blythe series, although they're two different, one's called Idaho, one called Blythe, they're the same series. And Blythe, being in the desert of California, is close to where a friend of ours lives, Pat Rampey. You may have heard of Pat Rampey. His name's out there in this movement. He's still involved with the message. But he was at those meetings in Blythe, California. And I was presenting the 2520. I don't know exactly what I was presenting, but from the floor, because we've known Pat for a really long time. And people do it even if they don't know me. He just interjected during the sermon. He says, "Hey, Brother Pippenger, have you ever noticed that there's 46 years between 1798 and 1844? And then in John 2:20, the Jews said that this temple is 46 years in the making." And I'm thinking, I'm having to answer this question from the floor. No, I never noticed that. But from that point, I mean, these numbers begin to explode, because then you see Moses' 46 days on the mount getting the information on building the tabernacle. There's 46 chromosomes in the human temple, and on and on. And once that number becomes valid, then you're starting to deal with the 220. All these numbers begin to be symbols that we had not recognized before, and it's happening in this history. And then in 2012, Parminder, he begins grappling with the 126 that we'd already associated with William Miller's dream, as I shared a little bit last night, that 126 years from 1863 to 1989. And Parminder is the first one that says, well, this is a symbol. I don't know if he's the first one that says symbol of the 2520, but he's the first one that said, well, if we can take the 126 from 1863 and go to 1989, what happens if we take the 126 from 1888? Where does it go? It goes to 2014. Okay, so in 2012, Pippenger is having a private study with a group of people in Wales discussing these concepts, but he tells them, this isn't for public, this is just the study we're having together, this isn't for public distribution. Distribution, but there's another word. Dissemination. It isn't for public dissemination. But he had a couple people in that group that don't pay attention to directions, and they put it out on the web. Okay, and when they put it out on the web, then the cat was out of the bag. And before that time, I'd been laboring with him behind the scenes on the internet through email, saying, "Look, Sister White says no more time setting." I'm using the same quotes that all of you are familiar with about never have another message hung upon time. But when it got out in the public arena, there was already an alienation going on between some of us in this movement. And it was going to become public, this shaking, when the book of Joel gets introduced into history. But leading up to the argument over the book of Joel, the people that were on the wrong side of that issue, from my perspective, the ministries that are on the wrong side of that issue and end up leaving this movement, they already had an attitude problem with Pippenger. Okay, Pippenger had been to our ministry in Arkansas prior to that time period. How many months did he live there? A few months?
He lived there 3 months, like in the summertime.
Yeah, with his boys, they lived with us. So we'd known him for a while. And he had pointed out some inconsistencies with these other brethren, not in a negative way, but he just pointed them out, and they were a little bit defensive about it. So when they had opportunity to show that Pippenger was a heretic for time setting, they did so. So my point is at this point in time, for the first time in this movement, 2012 to 2014, you're going to see a fight over the message that takes place internal in this message. Before that time, it's all the Adventist theologians are fighting it, but never before had you had people in this movement that would teach with these two tables behind them that were now saying those people over there that are standing in front of these two tables teaching prophecy, they're wrong and we're right. Okay, so for the first time, the argument against this message in this history becomes internal at that level, and what Pippenger was identifying was 2014, and but he was doing it from the idea that if you start back here in 1888, 126 years takes you to 2014. And his argument was, in 1888, there was a Blair Bill, a Sunday law, therefore in 2014 there will be a Sunday law. But there wasn't any Sunday law in 1888. Blair introduced a Sunday law, but it wasn't passed. So there was some weaknesses in how he was addressing it. But nevertheless, this is the beginning of time setting. And when everyone comes out against him, I came out against him as well, in terms of, I'd already been laboring with him. But he stepped back and he dropped the subject. Okay, so this is where definite time or time setting came into this movement, but he gets dropped because of this shaking. He quit teaches it. He goes back into secular work, steps out of ministry for quite some time until I don't remember exactly when. So in this history, very few people know that little story there, and I left a lot of details out. People that have been in this movement and have watched the public development of this message, they know some of it. But if they were going to go to this history, if they had a familiarity, and say, why was there a shaking going on between Future for America and these other ministries in this history, most of you would say because of the book of Joel. Okay? The book of Joel is the separation point between these ministries, because there's insects in the first few verses of Joel chapter 1, and you're going to find there's going to be 3 ideas that pop up during this history. And two of those ideas end up leaving this message altogether. One of the ideas is that these insects are Islam. And the other idea is that these insects are the 144,000. But the truth of it is these insects were Rome. So we began to have this internal shaking in this movement over the book of Joel. But most people don't know that this shaking actually began back here in 2008. And almost everyone, now you got to take this, I can argue against it, what I'm going to tell you. I can show you a logic about what the position I'm going to take, which I believe is correct. I can tell you why there's a logic out there that proves that I'm wrong. Okay, but almost every person that has been publicly acknowledged as a teacher in this movement that has left, okay? Anyone that has got some kind of public recognition, oh yeah, I've seen him on the internet teaching this message, but has ultimately left this message. Almost every one of them, before they leave the message over a supposed doctrinal issue, has had a personal confrontation with me over some kind of moral situation that I've felt forced to confront them over. But people don't know that. People don't know that, like in 2008, the ministries that are going to leave in this history, that we've already bumped heads over an issue of whether it's okay for a leader in this movement to teach this message on the worship hour and then go home and beat up his wife. Okay, and his daughter. I mean, is that okay? I don't think it's okay. Okay, so I took a position right here in 2008 that I don't think it's okay. I won't work with this guy ever again, and I haven't until he publicly repents and turns around, which he hasn't done. But there were other ministries there that watched the identical thing that I watched, knew the same kind of information I knew, but they continued to work with them because I believe because London's a nice place to go to. Okay, it's a fun place. It's much easier to go to London and preach this message than it is to go to South America or Africa and teach this message. All right, so these ministries back here, they knew that I'd taken a position, and they knew that I believed they should have taken the same position that I did, but they chose the middle ground. And it was a tension between us all the way along, but the public arena that watches this message, they knew nothing about it. So when they get to 2014 and this separation is taking place, they're primarily thinking, well, this is over the book of Joel. Okay. Now, one of the people that leaves here, it's not about wife beating. It's about the last time I ever had a good conversation with the brother. And I wasn't trying to be critical. I was trying to help him, from my perspective, be more effective in his personal ministry. I told him, I said, man, if you and your wife don't get your child under control, it's going to destroy your ministry, because their young child was totally out of control. Totally out of control, okay? So I'm just telling the guy, he's a young guy, man, I guarantee that Seventh-day Adventists, they're not going to tolerate that or accept your witness if this is what you're bringing to them and saying that you're a messenger of the Lord. And from that point on, this guy, so anyway, you don't realize that these people that have left this movement, they always seem to leave over a doctrinal argument. But what I'm telling you is that before you get to the doctrinal argument, almost all of them have had some personal issue with me. So I'm saying that almost all those guys that have left will point to me as the problem. So the logic for me is if this one person is always involved with the argument, in every argument that comes along, that's me, the evidence would tell you that it's probably this one person that's the problem, okay? So you can take it either way that you want to take it. But I'm saying that this has happened in this history, and this was just part of it, this time setting, and it gets put away here, and it doesn't get brought back in until what would it be, 2018? At the Italian Prophecy School, the subject of time comes back in, and now you can't come to these meetings without hearing about time. Okay, so in this history, here's the reason I'm telling this story. In this history, we're arguing over Joel, but we're still working together, okay? The public knows that this ministry and our ministry is in the same camp meeting, but they know what I think about Joel. It's Rome. They know these guys think Joel is Islam, and this guy thinks Joel is the 144,000. They know this problem's going on, but it doesn't separate us. What separates us? Where was the real... Does anyone know what the issue was that brought it all to an end? Public evangelism. Okay? Now, all of these guys in this history, all of them, have been teaching correctly that when an angel comes down and he has something in his hand, that God's people are to take that and eat it. And it's going to be sweet in your mouth and bitter in your stomach. We all know that. We're all teaching it. But we reached a point in time where in Ezekiel 2 and 3, where Ezekiel says his words were found and I did, no, that's Jeremiah. But Ezekiel's going to eat the word, and he's told that he has a message to take exclusively to Israel, which to us is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we'd all been teaching it. We'd been using Ezekiel 2 and 3 together, but we began to focus in and say, no, this is saying that we have a specific message for the Adventist Church. And one of these persons has already changed his title to where he's not going by his name anymore. He's put a new title in his business cards in his ministry. He's calling himself the evangelist. Okay, so his whole purpose is he wants to go out doing evangelism. So there came a point, someone sent me a clip from something that he presented out in the church in California, where he says something like, this darkness that's coming out of Arkansas about no public evangelism. So then it started, okay? Then it started. But what the Lord did, I believe, is He led us to a specific study that has been an absolute, one of the most important studies you come across in this movement, and it's a study that we call covenant lines. Okay? Over here, this is some of the covenant lines. And what my argument is that Abram is the first representative of the covenant between God and a peculiar people. But this covenant is going to get passed on to other personalities. You got Isaac in here and Jacob. But these are the covenant lines that we use. And what this did for us with this covenant lines, and we weren't searching for it, it comes to the surface at this time. We realized that in this covenant line, in the story of Moses, that there is a time period where there is an internal work that is done for a people when they're entering into covenant with the Lord. And it's only internal. It's no external. And with the story of Moses, I'll keep it simple at first. This is the 40 years. But we already mentioned in Numbers 14 that those 10 tests, they took place, the 10th test was 2 years in. So this 2 years here would make this 38 years. Okay, from here, when the Lord entered into covenant with Moses and those people that came out of Egypt, for 2 years He tests them, and He's going to give them 10 tests. And when they fail that 10th test, He breaks His covenant with them, and He enters into covenant with Joshua and Caleb. When did the Lord enter into covenant with ancient Israel that comes out of Egypt? But maybe you have never thought about it before, but it's a very specific point in time in that narrative, and you can demonstrate it prophetically. Most people say Sinai, but no, it isn't. Sinai, let's say entering into covenant with the Lord, it's a process, okay? But he enters into covenant with them at a certain point in time, and it's not Sinai.
Oh, Passover. Passover.
Passover is probably part of the process too, but it's the Red Sea. At the Red Sea, what is the Red Sea? It's the baptism. Okay? The Bible says so. It's baptism. Okay? And for us, what is baptism? Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. It's 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
9/11 is baptism as a waymark. Okay? What's the primary history that we use for 9/11? The angel of Revelation 18 comes down, has been typified by Revelation 10. That's probably the primary. What's the second primary? The baptism of Christ, right? Okay, the baptism of Christ. So the baptism, the angel comes down. And when Christ is baptized, what is he doing in terms of Revelation 9? He's confirming the covenant. Okay, so the baptism at the Red Sea is the covenant confirmation. Didn't I say Daniel 9?
You said Revelation 9.
Daniel 9. Okay. All right. So, you have to see this. You need to, I don't know if you need to, but I would hope that you settle into the reality that the Lord entered into covenant with the children of Israel at the Red Sea right here. But in 2 years, he's going to break his covenant with them. He's going to enter into covenant with Joshua and Caleb. And this history here is a history of an exclusive internal work that goes on with God's covenant people before they are prepared to take a message to the world. So at the end of the 40 years, Joshua and Caleb are going to lead the children of Israel into a battle. What is that battle? Jericho. And Sister White lines up Jericho with what? The Sunday law. The Sunday law. I have the quote here if you're not familiar with it. All right, is everyone familiar with that? Okay, let's hear it. And it's a really, really important quote. And I'm going to tell you some of the phrases from the quote that don't speak to what I want to tell you. But when I tell them to you, you'll know that this is an important quote because you've probably heard it several times. The first paragraph says, unsanctified ministers are arraying themselves against God. They are praising Christ and the God of this world in the same breath. While professedly they receive Christ, they embrace Barabbas, and by their actions say, not this man, but Barabbas. Let all who read these lines take heed. Satan has made his boast of what he can do. He thinks to dissolve the unity which Christ prayed might exist in his church. He says, I will go forth to be a lying spirit, to deceive those that I can, to criticize and condemn and falsify. Let the son of deceit and false witness be entertained by a church that has had great light, great evidence, and that church will discard the message that the Lord has sent and receive the most unreasonable assertions and false suppositions and false theories. Satan laughs at their folly, for he knows what truth is. Many will stand in our pulpits with the torch of false prophecy in their hands. This is a line that many Adventists are familiar with. So this is that particular passage, really important passage. But in the next, I've touched on 2 paragraphs, and the paragraph that follows, I'm going to cut into the middle of it. And it says, angels' hands will overthrow the deceptive schemes that are being formed. The bulwarks of Satan will never triumph. Victory will attend the third angel's message. What's the third angel's message? It's a warning about receiving the mark of the beast. The victory is to receive not the mark, but so this is putting it in the context of the Sunday law. Victory will attend the third angel's message. As the captain of the Lord of hosts tore down the walls of Jericho, so will the Lord's commandment-keeping people triumph, and all opposing elements will be defeated. Let no soul complain of the servants of God who have come to them with a heaven-sent message. Do not any longer pick flaws in them, saying they are too positive, they talk too strongly. They may talk strongly, but is it not needed? God will make the ears of the hearers tingle if they will not heed His voice or His message. So, here she's comparing the Sunday law with Jericho. But she's also, if you're not familiar with it, she's saying that anyone that rejects this message, God will make their ears tingle. And if you type in tingle into the Bible, there's only 3 places where tingle is used, and it's about ears tingling, and it always has to do with the close of probation of God's people. Every single time, and probation closes for Adventism at the Sunday law. So internally in this paragraph, you can show that she's speaking about the Sunday law, and Jericho is the Sunday law, and this is where we carry the message to the 11th hour workers. So, at the end of this 40 years, Joshua and Caleb are going to go into Jericho. And we know that if they'd passed these 10 tests, they could have went in earlier, but they failed the test. They broke the covenant. The Lord entered into covenant with another people. And so, I'm just putting some of these characteristics here. What we learned from this, in the context of this argument way back when, is that at the beginning of ancient Israel, that would be the Alpha, right? So this is the sign of Alpha, is it not? Yes?
Yeah.
I think it is, but I'm not sure. Is it upside down? Greek. Anyway, whatever the sign for Alpha is in the Greek language, that's what I'm trying to do here. And this is the Omega. And I think that's supposed to be round. But that's the Omega. Okay, so I'm just using those 2 symbols to mark beginning and end. This is the beginning of ancient Israel. This is the end of ancient Israel. At the beginning of ancient Israel, now I've already given you the information if you're willing to see it, that when the Lord is entering into covenant with Joshua and Caleb, what is He doing with the people that came out of Egypt? Pardon me, Brother David? Divorcing them. He's passing them by. He entered into covenant with a people here. They've rejected His plea of mercy here. And now they're going to die one by one over 38 years. So what is the sign of the covenant for them? It's circumcision, is it not? Let's just make sure we understand this. Go to Genesis 17. Because if you look up the word token in the Hebrew, or the word sign in the English, you're going to find that the definition of token is a sign, and the definition of sign is a token. Now, in Genesis 17, it says, and I'm looking for the verse that says that circumcision is going to be a token. 11. And you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. So the token, the sign, the evidence that you're in covenant relationship with the Lord is circumcision. That's why I said last night, I wanted to say it a couple times, was there any child that was born in this 38 years that was circumcised in that history? No. Okay, he'd entered into covenant with the people here. They broke the covenant, and until they're all dead, he's not going to enter into covenant fully into covenant with Joshua and Caleb until here, just before Jericho. And just before Jericho, where are they? They're in a place called Gilgal, which means a rolling away. a rolling away of the reproach. Okay, the reproach of these years, because here they're all going to get circumcised that have been born in this history. Then they're going to go into Jericho. And what's Jericho? Sunday law. But in the context of what I'm saying, what is it? Public evangelism. Because for this history here, they were being tested to see if they would uphold the covenant. They failed the test. There's people here that are in a testing process that pass the test. He's going to enter into a covenant with them down here. Does the testing process go all the way to the end? Are there people that are in a covenant relationship down here? I better not say it that way. I'll get myself in trouble. But this whole process is a test. What is the symbol of this testing period? The whole 40. The manna. When does the manna start? It starts right here. Where does it end? Right here. This 40 years, the manna that falls is a symbol of this testing process. And the manna is not a point in time, it's a process in terms of tests. How many steps in the manna test? 3. Okay, it's 3. And we'd have to go into the notes to show it because I don't remember exactly how Ellen White says it, but there's 3 steps in the manna test, which is the 3 angels' messages, okay? But anyway, this is the manna that symbolizes the testing process. So what am I doing up here? You may not know what I'm doing up here. What I'm doing up here is I'm explaining to you a study that came into this movement in order to respond to a shaking that was going on in this movement. A shaking that from the public arena may have seemed like it was over the book of Joel, but the separation was going on at a moral level, a personal level, long before Joel is even recognized. But more importantly, the real bottom line of the argument is public evangelism.
It's a hard saying.
It's a hard saying, who can hear it? So the Lord leads us to this history, and what we see is at the beginning of ancient Israel, there's a period of time, this 40 years, where there is an exclusive internal work going on for God's covenant people. And in that same history, when God is entering into covenant with that people, He is passing by a former covenant people. You follow me? Because that takes place at the beginning of ancient Israel, and it takes place again at the end of ancient Israel. And the end of ancient Israel, there is a period of time where there is an exclusive internal work going on for God's covenant people. And when the Lord is entering into covenant with that people, He's passing by the former covenant people. So all the elements that are at the beginning are at the end. So what is this period of time in the time of Christ? It's the week that He came to confirm the covenant. Yes? Okay, it begins at 27 AD, which is what? It's the Red Sea crossing. It's the baptism, yes? And it goes to Jericho, which is 34 AD, when the gospel is going to go to the Gentiles. Yes? Which is the Sunday law. In this history, that week is divided by the cross. So you have 1260 days, prophetic days, that Christ is confirming the covenant in person, and followed by 1260 days where the disciples are confirming the covenant for Christ. But Sister White, doesn't matter whether you read her comments on Daniel 9 in The Desire of Ages, Acts of the Apostles, or The Great Controversy. In those 3 books, she specifically says that this history here, the work was exclusively for the Jews. It was an internal work. It was not for the Gentiles. So because of this study, which I'm calling Covenant Lines, beginning with Abraham's covenant in Genesis 15, 17, and 22, we could show that at the beginning of ancient Israel, there's an exclusive internal work for God's covenant people. And when he's entering into covenant with that people, he's passing by a former covenant people. Who's he passing by in this history? The Hebrew church. And he's entering into covenant with the Christian church. And what is this? This is a testing process, right? What's the symbol of this testing history?
Bread of heaven.
The bread of heaven. You must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And the bread of heaven is the manna. Okay, so the manna at the beginning, bread of heaven at the end, very close. Very important to see that. The reason it's important to see that, some people haven't caught on to, is that every reform line is going to be the same, because God's dealing with men is ever the same. But there are some reform lines that are the beginning and the ending. The beginning of ancient Israel, the end of ancient Israel. You have two reform lines. The beginning of modern Israel in the time of the Millerites, and the end of modern Israel in the time of the 144,000. But it's all Adventism. And this was all the Hebrew church. So what I'm wanting you to see is that, yes, every reform line parallels all the other reform lines. But in some of these sacred histories, such as ancient Israel and modern Israel, you'll have a reform line at the beginning and a reform line at the end. And therefore, the reform line at the end, it demands that those waymarks has some kind of connection back to the 144,000 have to have a direct connection with the Millerites. And the time of Christ has to have some kind of direct connection back here with Moses. And you may have never thought about it that way, but it does. And that's why I'm pointing out that the symbol of the testing process for Moses is manna, but at the end, it's the bread of heaven, which is what? When Christ identifies himself as the bread of heaven, what's the context of his statement? He's saying, as the Lord sent manna down for ancient Israel, I'm the bread of heaven that's sent down here for the Hebrew church. He put it in the context of manna. So the testing process is symbolized by something that you have to eat. There's a people that are being entered into covenant with, while a covenant people are being passed by. But in both of these histories, there's an exclusive internal work that's going on for God's people. And until that work is accomplished, they do not have the spiritual authority to go to Jericho to do public evangelism. And so the Lord opened this up to us, and when he opened up, this is the part that had not really been recognized, but it's really easy to show in the history of Adventism, is that from October 22nd, 1844 until 1850, there's an exclusive internal work going on for modern Israel. There's a quote that I'm sure all of you have heard. Maybe it's not familiar to you, but you'll remember it. I don't remember it well enough to paraphrase it well, but it's where she talks about the disappointment of October 22nd, 1844, and she compares it with the disappointment of the Hebrews by the Red Sea. Not the disciples, the disappointment of the Hebrews by the Red Sea is the one I'm looking for. So in 1844, Sister White's going to line this up with the Red Sea crossing. Okay, because disappointment here with Pharaoh's army behind them, Red Sea in front of them, disappointment here. They've just misunderstood the prophetic message. And what they have to do here is now go back and understand what they did not understand about the sanctuary in heaven. So they have a work to do for themselves to find out who and what they are and what they misunderstood. And as we pointed out last night, this is the Lord entering into covenant with them, but it's in 1846 where we get all these covenant symbols: marriage, name change, rebaptism, Sabbath keeping. Then, as we pointed out last night, by November 9th of 1849, you're 144 days from October 22nd, 1844, which means you've got the period of time that Christ would be in the most holy place doing his work of high priest, which is suggesting that the Lord could have finished his work for that people, and they could have taken the 1853 chart and finished the work, and we'd been in heaven ere this, and none of us would even exist. And Sister White confirms that that was a possibility, even though it didn't happen. Brothers and sisters, you realize it was a possibility that when Christ came here in this history, that the Jews could have recognized who he was. And if they, in 27 AD, if they accepted John the Baptist's testimony about Jesus, who he was the Messiah that was coming, what would they be forced to do? They would have to crucify him anyway to fulfill the prophecy. Wouldn't they? The prophecy talks about him being cut off in the midst of the week. It had to happen. Okay, so what I'm saying is, I'm just bringing up one of those biblical, can God create a rock that's too big for him to lift up? Okay, it's one of those things. Technically, if all the Jews had been faithful, the sacrifice still would have had to taken place for all of mankind, right? But it didn't happen that way. And it didn't happen that way in 1849. By this point in time, they're already turning away from this history here. But, setting that aside, from here to here is an exclusive internal work for the beginning of modern Israel. The end of modern Israel, the Omega, the 144,000, based upon these three witnesses, there's going to have to be a period of time where there's an exclusive internal work with the people the Lord is entering into covenant with. And at the same point in time, what's he going to be doing with the former covenant people? Was that the case here? Who was the former covenant people in the time of the Protestants? Okay, so you have three witnesses here that says that when we get down here to our history, there's going to be a covenant people that are being passed by. What's the symbol of the testing process in this history? Eating the little book. Angel comes down in Revelation 10, first angel, has a little book open in his hand. In early writings, when the second angel comes, he has a scroll in his hand. And in early writings, when the third angel arrives, he has writings in his hand. So all the three angels' messages that came into Millerite history, first arrived in 1798, second in 1844, third in 1844, all those angels have something to eat in their hands. So you have a book as a symbol of this, a little book, but I don't have much room, a symbol of this testing process. So what's going to be the symbol of our testing process? And when would our testing process begin? 1989 and 9/11. Which is it? 9/11? 9/11? 1989. Okay. All right. So the testing process for the end of ancient Israel began when?
Baptism.
At his baptism. His baptism typifies what? 9/11. And it's going to go till when? Which would be Jericho. It would be 34 AD. Now the problem for us that is outside the scope of this presentation is that the Lord has brought us to the point to where we're seeing judgment on the priests, on the Levites, and the Nethinims. Okay, so I'm talking in general terms. Sunday law down here, testing process for Adventism is over. This is the end of verse 40. But we know by the time you get to the Sunday law in the United States that there's been a testing process for both priests and Levites.
Some are already sealed.
Yeah, their characters are already set. Sunday law is only where they're going to manifest it. But my point is that for us as priests, what is the Sunday law? Close of probation. But what is the battle that we mark? It's the battle of Raphia. Peniam's over here. Peniam is where probation begins to close for the Levites. But we're not dealing with those fractals at this point. So I had to say it, but I want to move away from it. What I'm dealing with here is that on the story of covenant lines, you can show in these three histories the same characteristics. It's always a testing process when the Lord is entering into covenant with the people. And Sister White says in the last days of Earth's history, the Lord will renew His covenant with His commandment-keeping people. Is that what He did up here? He renewed His covenant right here in Gilgal with Joshua and Caleb through the process of circumcision just before they go into Jericho. So that's the promise about ancient Israel. In the last days of Earth's history, the Lord will renew His covenant with His commandment-keeping people. That would be the 144,000. And when He does so, based upon these lines, He's going to enter into covenant with the 144,000, but He's going to be passing by the former covenant people. Seventh-day Adventists, the former covenant people here, Protestantism here, Hebrew church here, and those that came out of Egypt here. Not speaking against Joshua and Caleb. Here, the symbol of the testing process is manna. Here's the bread of heaven. Here's the little book. What is it here? The hidden manna. Why is it hidden? What do you mean by the hidden manna? That comes from the church of Pergamos. So why is it hidden for you and I? When's the testing process begin?
You have to unseal the book of Daniel.
Do you guys know this, or are you just having a hard time expressing it in words?
That's where the hiding is. That's where
You get into a different subject, but good idea. All right, let's go there. Did you hear what she said? I don't know that she said it completely, but this is worth understanding. From 9/11 to this point here, we have two witnesses of 5 months, which is 150 days. Okay, what are those two witnesses?
It's the second wall.
The first wall has a time period of 150 in it. Okay, so yeah, when you take 9/11 as a waymark and you bring other prophecies up on top of the line of 9/11, one of the lines that you put on top is the fifth trumpet, which is the first woe. And the first woe has a period of 150 years that goes to here. That's one witness. What's the second line, the second biblical line that we plug in here that agrees with this 150? It's what Sister Kathy was referring to. Don't ask her. Elizabeth.
Oh, she was
Elizabeth,
when she was pregnant.
when she was pregnant,
Mary went into hiding was it Mary?
yeah, Mary goes and greets her, but that's not my point. Her husband, Elizabeth's husband, Zechariah, he's in the temple doing his service. He disbelieves the prediction about the birth of a son, and so he's struck dumb. Okay, he's going to stay dumb until when? Until the birth of John. And what would that be? When does John's birth take place?
6 months.
Well, 9 months after that. But I'm not talking about when John. What does the birth of John represent? What happens to Zechariah when John is born?
he struck down.
No, he's struck. He speaks. So when is this speaking marked? When does Balaam's ass speak? When does the United States speak? Sunday law. Okay, he's not going to speak till the Sunday law, 9 months later. Okay, that would be over here. Because in the story of Elizabeth, she's embarrassed, right? Because because she's an elderly woman that just got pregnant. So for her first 5 months, she goes into hiding. This is what Sister Kathy was saying. This history here, from here to here, is the period of hiding.
That's when all the information is coming out, so you can call it the hidden manna.
Okay, if you're going to teach it, you have to speak it louder where it gets recorded. When this angel comes down at 9/11, my brother Brad, does he have a book in his hand? No, not in Revelation 18. You don't see it, but it's there, isn't it? Why is it there? Because the testimony of two or three, a thing is established. That the first angel, second angel, third angel all come down with something, writing in their hand that you have to eat. Then you know when this angel comes down, he has a writing in his hand that you have to eat, but you can't see it because it's hidden. And that's why in Pergamos it says hidden manna. Because this is the history of hidden things. You and I will be tested in this history about whether we have the ability to recognize prophetic truths that are hidden. So this history, the testing process of this history is the hidden manna that's in the book, that's in the hand of the angel of Revelation 18 when he comes down. So what we're being tested by in our history is not surface truths. It's truths that are deep within God's Word. They are hidden. Okay? Because this period of time here, where does this take us? Where's this 150 take us to? What is this way marked here? You want to call it midnight?
Someone says that they're not the same, but I've always...
No, don't go there. I don't want to explain
Okay, well,
why people say that.
midnight, rock.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to go there. Yes, you're right, some people say that, but to explain it is to explain the two models. And I don't want to go there. You can if you want, you can insist. November 9th, 2019, Raphia, midnight, is the end of this hiding. In this history here, what you and I are being tested by are hidden truths. Okay, but back over here, there's a symbol of the testing period in each of these four lines. Manna, bread of heaven, little book, and a book that's in the angel's hand, but it's hidden. But in Pergamos, it's called hidden manna. Okay, manna, beginning, manna, end. In this history, the Lord's entering into covenant with the 144,000, but He's passing by a covenant people. It's a testing process. And in this history, from 9/11 until this point over here, there is an exclusive internal work that goes on among those people that are entering into covenant with the Lord, and they are not to do public evangelism. So this study, which we call Covenant Lines, was recognized in this history in response to this argument over public evangelism. There was a lot of baggage associated with it, Joel, stuff behind the scenes. But public evangelism is where the parting of the ways took place. Okay, so what I'm saying is that Covenant Lines is a study that the Lord opened up in that history that just continues to produce information to support the direction that we as God's people are going. Okay? It even speaks to definite time setting. Okay? But in order to see the strength of this argument of covenant lines, we had to go back and review it. So have I caught all the points to line these four lines up?
So I got the whole alignment and everything, but again, I'm still going back to Moses, the public evangelism. Okay, so we come to Jericho.
Yep.
And what brings us? How do we declare that to be public evangelism again? I'm not sure. I really understand.
What happened at Jericho?
The whole city is watching, I guess, what's happening to the
Okay, is
wall.
that what it's?
Not that the whole city's watching. Now, maybe that's part of it, but it's not the part that I'm looking for. Jericho's a symbol of the world at that point in time. Okay, so Israel's got a work to carry to the world. And it's a work that the Lord does. All they do is be obedient to God's command. And Jericho comes tumbling down. Anybody saved in Jericho?
Rahab.
So there is a woman that is a church that is preserved. Why? She helped them, but she accepted the spy's report. So she's going to accept the prophetic message that's delivered to Jericho about the demise of Jericho, and she's going to identify herself with what? With the red cord. Okay, so in Jericho you see a church that is preserved from the destruction because they have watched God's people. They've been prepared in advance for the prophetic message to respond to the battle when it takes place. That's the 11th hour workers. Okay, that's what Jericho is a symbol of. And what they go around the city 6 times, isn't it? 6 times, and then they blow the trumpets 6 times, and the 6th time they blow the trumpet, the city comes down. It's 7. Because it's 7, isn't it? Okay, because right here, brothers and sisters, this is the opening of the 7th seal. This is the climax here. This is where the 7th seal is open, and the 7th seal is marking when the Jericho's coming down. And so I was teasing you about the number 6 to sink it in, so you can understand that what we're saying here about the churches, the seals, and the trumpets, they're still viable in our day and age. When we get to Raphia, the 7th seal is like a Band-Aid. I'm not arguing that. It comes off like a Band-Aid, a little bit at a time. But when the seal is fully removed, it's removed right here. Okay, in this history between Raphia and Peniam. And what I'm wanting you to see is this is where Jericho and this final battle begins all the way to the second coming of Christ. This being the 7th seal is marking the 7th trumpet in the 7th circuit of ancient Israel going around Jericho. All right? What else? What other questions before we move on here?
So the public evangelism that they gave a public testimony to Jericho, to the people of Jericho, and Rahab, of all the people, Rahab believed it? I mean, is that how we should understand it?
Well, you're kind of putting it in a minority light. I don't know how to say it, not a minority light, but I know Rahab seems like one citizen out of thousands. She seems like just a real minority, but that's not what she's representing, I don't think. I think she's representing a church that responds from the whole world.
I just read it last night. They had the report from the other nations of what Israel had been through.
Right.
So there was the dread was upon the city that they knew, what the Lord had done and who He was. So
Yes.
in that way, it's a witness to that.
But most of them in the city, even though they knew that, they didn't respond.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Rahab did.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so there's all kinds of ways to go into the Battle of Jericho and show it's here at the end.
I think I'm just so confused. So you're saying at the Sunday law, public evangelism begins?
Yep. All right, let me ask you these questions. Follow on. I'm going to ask these questions for you. Does Jesus illustrate the end from the beginning? Is the time of Christ the end for ancient Israel?
Yes.
Moses would be the beginning.
Yes.
But this is, together, Moses and Christ represent the beginning of Israel. Yes? Okay, because there's 2 Israels, is there not? There's literal Israel and spiritual Israel. Or sometimes we call spiritual Israel modern Israel. So who do we identify as modern Israel? Not literal, but modern. Adventism. So in Adventism, who is modern Israel, there is a beginning and an end also. The Millerites are the beginning of modern Israel. 144,000 is the end of modern Israel. So in this covenant line history, you've got a beginning and end, a beginning and an end, and you've got a beginning and an end. Okay, if you're willing to just take Israel as singular units. Okay, so in that you've got, depending on how you play it, you've got more than 3 witnesses. That the characteristics of this line equal the characteristics of this line equal the characteristics of this line, which identify the characteristics of this line. And in this line, when the Lord's entering into covenant with a people, He's passing by a covenant people. Same thing here, same thing here, has to be the same thing here. God doesn't change. In this history, 40 years, He's only working with the Israelites. They're in the desert all by themselves. In fact, right here in this history, once Moses says, hey, you're all going to die in the wilderness because you rejected the message of Joshua and Caleb, what do? They try to go in and conquer the land, okay, in their own strength. So what they try to do? They try to do public evangelism. And they get wiped out. The ark of God was not with them, the Bible says. Okay, so here, now they're going to go do public evangelism, and it's going to work for them. Yes? Okay, so in this history, Sister White says repeatedly, in the week that Christ came to confirm the covenant with many, this is exclusively for the Hebrew church. It is not for the Gentiles. Okay, when was the first, who was, and when was the first Gentile convert converted? Who was he and when did it take place? And it's right after Peter has the vision of the unclean animals. Cornelius. Cornelius is the, Sister White says it, Cornelius is the first Gentile convert. When was he converted? AD 34. There's not one conversion of a Gentile before AD 34 at the end of that week. So this gives you 2 witnesses in literal Israel. And from 1844, you can read the history of Adventism to 1850. They were not doing any outreach. It was all seeking to understand what happened on October 22nd, 1844, what the third angel's message was, coming to grips with the Sabbath. And it's in this history here, 1849 to 1850, where Sister White begins speaking about the need of organization in order to carry a message to the world. Okay, they had not done any external work in Adventism before 1850. That's what this chart is created for. This is their witnessing tool for public evangelism. Therefore, from 9/11, when the Lord is entering into covenant with the 144,000, why do we get to start it at 9/11? Because of the baptism. Which baptism? Is it the baptism of Christ or the baptism by the Jews of the Red Sea? Okay. Or the baptism that must take place here, because Sister White says that the day after October 22nd, 1844 was typified by the Jews at the Red Sea crossing. Okay, so these 3 waymarks, they all line up, and they're all speaking about baptism and beginning a testing process. So we're identifying 9/11 as the testing process beginning for the 144,000. Yes, the Lord began, as a couple of people said, to raise up Ephesus in 1989, but there's other lines that are going on here that get addressed from 1989 to 2001.
We've been studying in our conference call a little bit about the 144,000, or discussing it, and so this is important to understand. You can't have the 144,000 can't do their work until the group is made up, right? I mean, so, And then you have, and I'm also thinking about the line with the disciples up to Pentecost. They were doing an internal work, right, up till before Pentecost. And then they were,
Well, be careful about Pentecost. I mean, they're not going. Pentecost is how many years before 34 AD? Yeah, 3.5 years.
right.
So yes, there's an organizational work going on there, but that isn't, Pentecost isn't carrying it to the Gentiles, it's carrying it to the Adventist church.
Right. But, yeah, I don't know why I threw that in there. I was just thinking about the internal work they were doing. But as far as 144,000, they don't do the work that they're getting prepared for before the Sunday law. Right? They're trying to get there first. I mean, to get sealed.
What work are they going to do?
The final great harvest. I mean,
Okay.
after they're going to be lifted up as an ensign and bring in the.
Okay, I get your logic. Your logic is probably accurate, but the reason I wouldn't teach it that way is this, but it's not anything that me and you would have to argue over, is that one of the definitions of the 144,000 is that they don't die. And I'm not convinced that Seventh-day Adventists that receive the seal of God at the Sunday law will not be laid to rest before Michael stands up.
Okay.
So even though you and I may come to midnight, Raphia, and receive the seal of God, or make it all the way to the Sunday law and have the seal of God, there's still no guarantee that we don't get laid to rest before Michael stands up. So the 144,000 to me has to contain the element that they don't die.
You talk more about 144,000 generation, the line. That's what you're talking about. So not necessarily literal 144,000 alive, but the people that are part of Ephesus or the final generation, right? That are not to do public evangelism until they're ready, until they receive all the light, and then they can go, like a Battle of Jericho.
I'm 7 minutes over. Let's have a prayer and we'll come back after the break to this subject and start up here. Heavenly Father, we want to understand these things. We want to understand the nuances between the 144,000 that go through the great time of trouble and your command to each of us to strive to be among the 144,000 and how that looks in our history and in the history of the Sunday law. We ask that you would clarify these things for us and continue to teach us truths about these covenant lines that we need to understand at this time. We thank you for the time you've spent with us this day. In Jesus' name, amen.